Hello and welcome to Moving Forward in Medicine. My name is Jordan and this is a series that I wanted to go ahead and start on my channel because I am super interested in the healthcare field, and I think given our political climate and our healthcare climate, I think it's really important to go ahead and have these larger conversations. And as a neuroscience student, an engineering student, and a pre-med student, I feel like I should contribute my piece to the larger conversation. These are topics that are really interesting to me. This is where I see my career going, and I think it's really important just for the general population to understand more about what's going on. It's just a hectic time, and I think the more information we have, the more prepared and safe we can be. So within this series, I am going to focus on a bunch of different healthcare topics. Specifically today, I'm going to be talking about the medical device industry because I am an engineering student, and that is something that gets me really riled up. The more I learn about the FDA regulation processes, the more I am just flabbergasted, mind-boggled, for a lack of ways to put it. I just feel like I was so uneducated and I really had no idea kind of how everything functions and how much it really does affect the everyday consumer, the everyday person. So I really just do want to go ahead and share this message today. Specific will be on medical devices, but this series as it continues, I hope to focus on a broad range of topics and just kind of see where it takes me. So today, focusing in on medical devices, I will be using one specific example, which will be Essure. I will not say it's a great example because great is a rather relative term. It's a great example in the sense that it shows us how harshly lax regulations within our system really affect the everyday consumer. I didn't realize until reading and doing a bunch of research and going through learning all this stuff in class, like how little the everyday consumer knows and how much it affects. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into the first episode of Moving Forward in Medicine. So I think the first topic we need to cover is what is the FDA, what do they do, what does it stand for? So the FDA is an American agency that stands for Food and Drug Administration, and they are responsible for regulating anything that is consumed. So anything from food, drugs, medical devices, cosmetics, anything that can come in contact with the skin, come in contact with you as a person. The FDA is usually in charge of regulating it and making sure it is safe and effective. Now, there is different branches in the FDA. There is food, drug, medical devices, just depending on what category you're focusing in on of consumer goods. So today in specific, we're going to be focusing in on the FDA processes of regulating medical devices. The FDA was started in 1906, but they did not have responsibility for regulating the medical device industry until 1976 when the Medical Device Amendment was passed. Now this did a few things. First off, it gave the FDA responsibility for regulating the medical device industry. However, the medical device industry had been happening long before this amendment was passed, and there were a bunch of devices already on the market beforehand. So what this amendment did was went ahead and grandfathered in all the devices that were on the market prior to 1976. What this means is that any device that was on the market prior to 1976 was able to stay on the market after this amendment was passed without having to meet any type of regulation that proved it was safe and effective for human use. The reason behind this was simply because there were too many devices on the market. I think that puts us off, obviously, on a rocky footing to begin with, as I will further explain how the FDA processes continue. So now, fast forwarding to modern day, the medical device industry has boomed. The US alone makes up 40% of the medical device industry, and that accounts for $156 billion. That's a lot of devices, so I think it's clear that the medical device industry is a huge and booming field, which is exciting if they have the regulations to keep up with it and ensure that this new booming technology is safe. So the FDA, after the 1976 amendment, had regulatory responsibilities of the medical device industry. So now that all of these devices have been grandfathered in, the FDA chose to release two regulatory processes that would monitor devices that are moved to the market. These are known as the 510K process or the pre-market notification process. The second process is the pre-market approval process, which is the more stringent of the two. So we will start with the pre-market approval process. This is also known as a clinical trial. It consists of 4 steps. You design your product, you test it in humans, you gather data, and then you present that data to FDA scientists who will then prove, or not prove, but either agree that your product is safe and effective, then yes, it can go to market. I will cover how the clinical trials can still fall short in my Essure example later on. Now, the 510K process is a little bit more risky. The 510K process allows for a medical device to be moved to market on the notion that it is rated equivalent to a device that has already been on the market. The issue with this is that the original device that has already been approved can be deemed ineffective, and the new device can still be pushed to market by being equivalent to this original device. So, for instance, if a device had been grandfathered in through the 1976 Act, and had since then been removed from market because it had been considered dangerous and harmful to patients, I can still develop a new device and approve it through the 510K process, regardless if the device on the market, the original, has since been removed due to ineffective or various reasons. It's just mind-boggling to think that this is this is the process. The idea behind it is to keep pushing for this innovation and this sped up time frame. But I think we're really losing sight of what the FDA is supposed to do, which is to protect and prioritize the public health. So with these regulations, it's really important to understand not only what they are, but how they can affect the everyday consumer. And a medical device that has been an example of kind of where these lax regulations really can harm the consumer is the medical device Essure. So Essure was a contraceptive that was built for women's sterilization. It was marketed as the greatest and newest technology because it was the first sterilization process that didn't need surgery. You could get it within 45 minutes in your doctor's office and be right on your way the next day. However, this device did prove to come with a lot of complications, and it was on the market much longer than it should have been, even after these complications were made known, simply because of the lack of regulations the FDA has towards the medical device industry. So Essure was a medical device designed by the medical brand Bayer in 2002 for women's sterilization. The product was removed from market in December of 2018, and within that time frame, it is estimated that 7,500,000 patients used the device worldwide. The medical device Essure is 2 spring-like coils that are about this big that are inserted into the fallopian tubes, and they cause chronic inflammation. Now, the chronic inflammation would then cause scar tissue to develop within the fallopian tubes, which would permanently seal off the tube, which would then block sperm from ever meeting the egg, hence no babies. As it turns out, chronic inflammation can cause a lot of pain, and Essure can cause a lot of pain and a lot of other side effects. So what women noticed with Essure, the stories range, and my heart goes out to anyone truly affected by this. That is kind of the importance of talking about this. So I do just want to go ahead and put that out there. So as Essure quickly gained popularity and became more dominant within the reproductive healthcare system, a lot of women got the implant, and a lot of women reported side effects from the implant. It took a really long time for people to link the device to the side effects they were experiencing because the side effects, a lot of them, were outside of reproductive health. So some women experienced neurological issues, brain fog, tremors, shakes. A lot of women experienced autoimmune disorders and the development of that sort of thing. Basically, this device wreaked havoc on a bunch of women's bodies for a really long time without anyone doing anything about it. This, of course, led a bunch of women who did have the device implanted and were experiencing these side effects to seek out how to get help and seek out how to remove this device. It was only after it was too late that it became known that this device cannot be removed. The scar tissue permanently covers the coil and permanently seals the coil into the fallopian tube, so the coil itself cannot be removed without fragmenting into the body and leaving shards of metal behind. This, of course, is very dangerous. However, the alternative of living the rest of your life with this device in your body that is causing all this havoc puts these women in a really, really hard spot. So how was such a dangerous and harmful product allowed to go to market, and how was it allowed to stay on the market for so long? And this is where we see the application of the regulatory practices of the biomedical industry. So Essure itself went through the pre-market approval, which was the more stringent of the two FDA processes. There was a clinical trial done for Essure. However, the clinical trial was only completed within a year, and this device is something that is meant to last your entire life. So the timeline alone is something that is not an effective time to deem whether or not the product is safe or not for human use. This is especially prevalent after many of the side effects became so known, considering that a lot of them were autoimmune disorders and neurological issues that last a lifetime and aren't developed within the first year. They usually onset after a long period of stress within the body, so it does take time for these side effects to develop. So the year-long testing trial for this device was not long enough for a lifelong implant. The second issue with the Essure process in terms of regulations is that there is no regulation factors, codes, anything like that for the actual implant or removal of the device. So there is no guidelines for how surgeons should use the device or take it out. There are horror stories out there of patients when you're only supposed to have 2 coils, having multiple, having the coils shift and relocate within the body and inserting another one, having the coil be pulled during removal and having it fragment into the body. Basically, there is no regulation of the surgical techniques for these devices and how to go about implanting them, which only adds another layer of unknown to the whole ordeal for the patient. Now, stepping outside of the clinical trial is what allowed the product to go to market. That's what allowed it to get approved, regardless of if it was ethical or not. Now, the only way a medical device can get removed from the market is through the manufacturer contacting the FDA and self-reporting that they would like to recall their product. Now, self-reporting is a horrible idea. There's so many things wrong with self-reporting. So why the agency that is supposed to prioritize and look out for the public's health is using self-reporting as a way to do so is very interesting. So let's statistically talk about why self-reporting is a bad idea. So the FDA puts the responsibility on the manufacturer to deem whether or not a product is safe after it's already been approved on market. Whether it's still safe or not for the consumer. Now, this is an issue because the manufacturer makes money from their product being on the market. So by coming out and saying that your product is no longer effective and is no longer safe for human use, the manufacturer opens themselves up to backlash as well as lost profit, which is something I would like to think that the manufacturer would consider as less of a importance when dealing with the public's health, but unfortunately in a capitalistic society I'm not sure that's something we can count on, so I do think it should be noted. On average, only 3 to 4% of adverse events from medical devices are reported, and an adverse event is less likely to be reported the more severe the event is. Now, an adverse event is any type of side effect that was unplanned due to the medical device, so that constitutes the autoimmune disorders that were developing in response to these devices, as well as like the tremors, the headaches, the backaches, everything that these patients were experiencing. So ultimately, the responsibility for self-reporting the negative effects of Essure was placed on Bayer, the manufacturing company. The Essure case is a prime example of why self-reporting doesn't work. The device was able to remain on the market for 16 years before the manufacturer took responsibility and recalled the product themselves. By the FDA placing the responsibility on the manufacturer, it really does feel like they are almost silencing the needs of the patient sometimes. It's quite clear that the regulations within the FDA processes to get a medical device approved as well as keep a device on the market are rather lax, and they really do put the average consumer at risk. I think the Essure case is a great example in understanding this. With that being said, these are definitely heavier conversations, but I do think they are important to have because the more knowledge you have, the less vulnerable you are. I think that's the only way we can see improvement within our healthcare system as a whole. And with that, I conclude the first episode of Moving Forward in Medicine. It was really nice to talk about this, just simply because I'm really interested in healthcare topics and I just want to ramble sometimes. So stay tuned for more videos about healthcare related topics, anything in pre-med. I will hopefully be doing some school related videos soon, although Zoom University is still going on, so we'll see how that goes. So if you guys want to follow me, subscribe, and I will link my Instagram below. But I'm just kind of excited to contribute my piece to the conversation, and yeah.